Dr. Regime Prasad.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to take the final call, my final call on this bill that started some time ago. And certainly the debates that we've had over the various stages of this bill, and even today, gets one to think about a whole series of things related to the subject of this bill, which really is, as the government likes to call it, welfare fraud. But what it gets me to do, Mr. Speaker, is to ask a number of questions. The first being, which is most important? Solving the real problems facing New Zealand today, and we could identify those problems. We hear every day in this House about the housing shortages and the difficulties in housing. We could talk about that. Is it more important to solve that problem? Or is it more important to create well-paying jobs? Is that another issue that we ought to be focusing on? Or increasing the size of manufacturing minus primary manufacturing in the primary sector? Is it more important to be talking about how we might do that? Or is it more important to talk about the effects of climate change on New Zealand and the changes that's already occurring? Perhaps talking about a better start for our children, for our young children and our parents. Is it more important to talk about that? Or another one could be developing a better educated workforce. Just take those series of issues to talk about that and put some real effort into making those kinds of changes. Or is it more important to be devising a scheme, as this bill does, to go after those who are, in the words of this bill and in the words of government members, defrauding the state of $20 million through a set of prescriptions that this bill provides us that in the end may or may not be successful or are more than likely to produce unintended consequences for the lives of those affected. So which is more important? To go after this small amount of money, relatively small amount of money, or to address those other major factors, which is what this House should be debating. But know what this government has been doing over the last 5.5 years is to devise from time to time a whole series of programs to really vilify a particular group in our society or sets of groups. So for me, I would even go further. That for me, doing the former is much more important, and doing less of what we're doing now would be important. I say that, Mr. Speaker, because there are as many systems as we care to create, within as many steps as we care to take within the present system that could work as effectively without this bill at all. This bill is not necessary. And the worker income could work far more effectively with these families to ensure that fraud does not take place, and where it does, the money is recouped. And by their everyday interaction with these families, because they do that regularly, they do that in many different ways, Mr. Speaker. But no, the government chooses this particular approach because somehow it taps into a vein that runs through New Zealand society. And there's no leadership in tapping into that vein, Mr. Speaker. And I think the Minister himself was actually giving a very good answer when, in the second reading of this particular bill, when he tried to compare, when he tried to debunk the figures that this side has been talking about in terms of the size of the fraud that this group is alleged to perpetuate, the size of the amount of money that has been recovered from this particular group compared to the dollar value of fraud that takes place in the taxation system. And our argument has always been, where is the fairness, where is the equality, how can we compare these two particular areas? One is a powerful group, one is a vulnerable group. And what he began to say was that, no, in fact, we do quite a bit to actually go and recoup money from those who are tax dodgers or those who have tax debt. And he says we do that and we are very, very successful. And he says, obviously, as listeners would have heard, the assertion has been made from time to time that the government is more interested in chasing after welfare debt than tax debt. And then he went on to say, the energy put into recovering tax debt and the money put into recovering tax debt is well in excess. In fact, it is nearly 5 times as much of what we are spending on welfare fraud. Now, so what the minister was saying to us, what I read in his comments, is that the government has been successful, the IRD has been successful in quietly working through the tax system to recover debt. And have we seen in the time of this government a sustained attack on tax debt or tax fraud? Have we seen that? No, we haven't. There hasn't been. Have we seen as much as we have heard from them about welfare fraud and those who are alleged to engage in welfare fraud? We haven't. No new legislation has been proposed by this government to reduce the tax dodgers, tax fraud. No campaign against those who are in that particular sector. If the minister is to be believed, IRD is quietly going about its business, identifying who these people are, and in fact, prosecuting some of them as well. And the prosecution also is very important, very interesting, because where prosecution in the tax area and the jail sentences have been given to those who have defrauded $800,000 plus, in the welfare fraud area, it's $67,000. So there is another set of standards being applied by this government, Mr. Speaker, to really tap into that vein that runs through New Zealand society against welfare fraud, or welfare in itself. And so, Mr. Speaker, there is something disingenuous about this government's approach to welfare. Ever since they have come, they have produced a whole series of terms, whole series of language, whole series of legislation, which in fact, in the end, will produce nothing. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about another and more as worrying an aspect about this bill, and this is about relationships. So here, Mr. Speaker, we have people, men and women, who for whatever reason have found themselves on their own with children. And because they have to provide for those children, have called on our welfare state to provide them with support. And we as taxpayers do that quite gladly, because you never know whose turn is it next, who might need that kind of support and the kind of safety net we provide. But the belief there is that here is a group of people living in abject luxury, and just simply taking from the state without putting anything back. The work they do bringing up children and bringing up the workers of tomorrow is never factored in. But much more seriously, Mr. Speaker, here are individuals who are bringing up children, and they will, from time to time, form an attraction with somebody. Some kind of relationship develops. And now the way this is crafted, Mr. Speaker, it appears as if it provides anybody who sees a beneficiary, a sole parent in particular, form a relationship, no matter what type it is. All of the chattering classes will begin talking, and this will be seen as an opportunity to report and complain even more, to work an income to say fraud is taking place. And so for a relatively small amount of money, we begin to affect the everyday lives of a very vulnerable group of people. Now, the government members don't care about that. But in fact, this is quite serious. And even those people who are in bringing up children dependent on the benefit, how do they feel about forming relationships with others, not knowing at what point that turns into anything serious, but knowing at any time that could be seen as fraud, and then prosecution starts. That begins to subject this group of people, Mr. Speaker, to a nasty, to developing a nasty approach by the state to them. And this group and allowing others to malign this group even further. We've seen the National Party do that in the past. I remember Orewa too, and those speeches that were given at the time. Because there is something that this government does not like about those who depend on the state, but if somebody from business dwells in the state, it's fine. It's okay, and they do that. And I think that's rather unfair, Mr. Speaker, and something that this side will want to address. Now, on this particular occasion, Mr. Speaker, we are supporting the bill because we do not want to be seen to be in any way supporting fraud of any kind, but there is an inherent weakness and flaw in this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Kanwaljit Singh Bakshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to stand.